If you've ever felt a strange discomfort when someone looks at you for a second too long, if compliments make you tense instead of happy, if you post something and then immediately want to delete it, you might relate to this. Some people don't just dislike attention, they hate being perceived. And what's confusing is that it doesn't always look dramatic. It can look like being private, independent, low-key, even confident. But underneath it, there's often a very specific psychological pattern. Being seen doesn't feel neutral. Being seen feels like risk, not because you're weak, because at some point your brain learned that visibility comes with consequences. And once your nervous system learns that, it doesn't forget easily. So let's talk about what hating being perceived really means and what it's often protecting. When someone hates being perceived, it usually shows up in small, everyday ways. It's keeping your camera off, even with friends. It's avoiding walking into a room if people are already seated and will all turn their heads. It's hearing your name called in public and feeling your body tighten. It's wearing the same safe clothes over and over, not because you don't care, but because you do, because you don't want anyone to form an opinion. It's rewriting a text message 10 times so you don't sound too much or too cold. It's waiting until late at night to post anything because fewer eyes will be on it. It's deleting stories right after you upload them. It's feeling exposed when someone says, "I noticed you've been quiet lately," because the fear isn't just being watched, it's being interpreted. It's someone forming a story about you without your permission. And for people who hate being perceived, that story feels like it can trap them. On the surface, it can look like introversion. But introversion is usually about energy, about needing solitude to recharge. This is different. This is about safety. People who hate being perceived often don't mind being alone. They mind being seen while they exist. There's a difference between "I like my privacy" and "I feel unsafe when people notice me." Because being perceived isn't just attention, it's evaluation. And evaluation, for some people, doesn't feel like a casual human thing. It feels like a verdict. So what's the hidden meaning behind the behavior? Often it's something like, "If you see me clearly, you can hurt me." Or, "If I'm visible, I'll be judged." Or even, "If I take up space, I'll owe people something." That last one is quieter, but it's common. When you're perceived, people expect you to respond, to smile back, to match their mood, to explain yourself, to be consistent, to be accessible. And for someone whose boundaries have been crossed in the past, emotionally, socially, sometimes physically, being perceived can feel like the first step toward being claimed. So they keep themselves small, not because they want to be small, but because small feels controllable. You can also see this pattern in how someone reacts to praise. Some people love praise. They feel warmed by them. But someone who hates being perceived might feel tense, because praise is still a form of being seen. It's someone looking closely enough to form an opinion. And even if it's positive, it can land like pressure. Now you have a role to maintain. Now you're the smart one, the strong one, the pretty one, the calm one, the reliable one. And if you stop performing that identity, you risk disappointment. So instead of feeling validated, you feel monitored, like you've been placed under a light you didn't ask for. And then there's the social media piece. A lot of people assume that those who don't post photos are insecure about how they look. Sometimes that's true. But often it's deeper than appearance. It's the discomfort of being turned into an object, a profile, a set of assumptions, a searchable identity. When you post a photo, you're not just sharing your face, you're giving people a way to hold you in their mind. And for someone who hates being perceived, being held in someone's mind can feel invasive because it can be distorted, it can be used, it can be talked about, it can follow you. So privacy isn't always secrecy. Sometimes privacy is protection from being turned into a story you can't control. Now, here's the deeper pattern. This usually doesn't come out of nowhere. People who hate being perceived often had early experiences where visibility wasn't safe. Not necessarily obvious trauma, sometimes it's subtle. Maybe in your home, being noticed meant being criticized. You walked into a room and someone immediately commented on your body, your expression, your tone. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, too loud, too quiet, too dramatic, too intense. So you learned being seen equals being corrected. Or maybe being noticed meant being used. You were praised when you were helpful, mature, easy, high-achieving, and ignored when you were messy, tired, emotional, or confused. So you learned if people see the real me, they leave, or they punish it, or they reshape it. In that kind of environment, the safest identity is the least visible one, because you can't be targeted for what people can't access. And that's not weakness. That's intelligence in a system that didn't feel safe. You can also see this in conflict patterns.
Someone who hates being perceived might avoid confrontation, not because they don't have thoughts, but because conflict requires visibility. It requires being legible. It requires saying, "This is what I feel. This is what I want." And if you've learned that expressing your needs leads to pushback, mockery, or abandonment, then staying vague becomes a survival skill. Even people-pleasing can fit into this, because pleasing can act like camouflage. If you match other people's expectations, they look past you. They don't investigate you. They don't question you. You become easy, and easy is safer than known. And here's where it gets interesting. The real reason often isn't confidence, it's control. Not controlling other people, controlling the amount of access they have to you. Because perception is access. When someone perceives you, they get information, they get data, they get emotional material. And if you've been misunderstood in the past, you start believing that being seen equals being misseen. So you'd rather not be seen at all than be seen incorrectly. That's why some people hate being perceived, even by people who love them. Because love doesn't automatically mean accuracy. Love doesn't automatically mean safety. Sometimes the people closest to you have been the ones who defined you the most aggressively. So you keep parts of yourself hidden, not because you're fake, but because you're protecting the parts that have been mishandled before. This is also why being perceived can feel exhausting, because it triggers constant self-monitoring. How am I coming off? Was that weird? Did I talk too much? Did my face do something? Did I sound annoying? It's like living with an invisible camera crew following you around. And over time, you stop feeling like a person and start feeling like a performance. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way. In the way you can't fully relax in public. In the way you only feel real when you're alone. In the way your personality comes back online when no one can evaluate it. There's another layer that people don't talk about much. Sometimes hating being perceived is tied to shame, but not the obvious kind. More like this feeling that if someone looks too closely, they'll find something unacceptable. Not necessarily something you did, just something you are. Neediness, anger, sensitivity, ambition, desire, even joy. In some households and social circles, joy itself draws attention, and attention invites correction. So you learn to flatten, to be neutral, to be fine, to be unremarkable. And then later in life, you might not even realize you're doing it. You just feel this low-level panic when you're too visible, like you stepped into the wrong kind of light. So what does this do to identity? It creates a life where you are present, but not fully witnessed. You might have friends, relationships, coworkers who know you, but only in the carefully edited version. And that can create a strange loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being around people while still feeling unseen. Because when you hate being perceived, you also block the kind of perception that feels nourishing. Being understood, being held gently in someone's attention,
being known without being judged. The protection works, but it has a cost. Not a moral cost, a psychological one. It costs closeness. It costs spontaneity. It costs the freedom of not having to manage your image every second. And it can also create a confusing self-image, because if you're always hiding parts of yourself, you start to lose track of what's actually there. You become whatever is least likely to be commented on. You become good at disappearing, even from yourself. And then when someone asks a simple question like, "What do you want?" or "What do you like?" it can feel strangely hard. Not because you don't have preferences, but because you learned to survive by not having visible ones. So if this topic hits something in you, it doesn't necessarily mean you're broken. It often means your mind adapted to a world where being seen didn't feel safe, where attention came with judgment, demands, or distortion. And now even neutralize can feel heavy. Even gentle curiosity can feel like exposure. Once you see this pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. In the way you shrink when you're complimented, in the way you go quiet when the room turns toward you, in the way you crave connection but dread being fully known. It was never random. It was a system, a way your brain tried to keep you safe by controlling access. And sometimes simply naming that, simply understanding that it's protection, not defect, changes the way you hold yourself. Not as someone who's too private, but as someone who learned very early that visibility had a price. If this explains something for you, there's more to uncover. Because these patterns don't just show up in public. They show up in love, in friendships, in how you carry yourself when nobody's watching. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it.